Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to another episode of Shoots with Coops, and today we're talking about planning your next surf photography outing, adventure, whatever you want to call it, your next session. I've never made a video like this in the past because a lot of the things I do is common sense to me. As a surfer, and any surfers out there who are photographers will know, there's certain things as surfers that we're constantly doing. We're constantly checking the swell, the winds, the weather, the forecasts, so we know when we're going to have waves. Now, that might be something new and maybe something I can impart a bit of wisdom to everyone out there who potentially wants to start shooting surf photography, wants to get into it, may live quite a long distance away from the beach where they can't just, 5-minute burn down the road and have a look and see what the conditions are. So I want to cover that today, and then we're going to go through gear as well. Bit of everything to get you into shooting your first sessions of surf photography. So we're going to start with weather, forecasts, winds, swell, all that stuff that you need to even get waves first, and then we're going to go into the gear, shooting from land, shooting from the water, film and digital. So it could be a long one, but I'll try and make it as quick as I can. So let's start with the most important things first. So there are 3 apps that I use, guys. Now these apps will be either different from state to state here in Australia, or different globally. There's one app that is sort of going to be universal to all of us, or one website, which we'll cover at the end. But the first 2 main ones I use is I need to check the swell and I need to check the wind. Because that's sort of, we want offshore. Where I am in Western Australia, we want easterly winds. So we want the wind blowing out to sea, creating offshore, nice, flat, calm conditions. That's perfect. That's what we want first. Then we want swell. So the first website I use here is a website called Seabreeze. Now, everything will be down in the comments section below, in the box below, guys. I'll have links to all these websites. So first thing I'm going to check is Seabreeze. Now, Seabreeze roughly gives me a 7-day forecast of the swell. It's generally not very reliable. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't, but generally what's reliable is the wind. So with Seabreeze, it'll give me a rough forecast and I'll know, okay, potentially in 3, 4, 5, 7 days time, there's a period of swell coming, and it will tell me the expected winds. Now, they usually get the winds pretty accurate here. Like I said, I want south, southeast, easterly, northeast, southeast conditions. Anything with a bit of west in it is no good. Obviously, that's onshore. It's not going to be as nice of conditions. But that's what I'm looking for here. I'll use Seabreeze to first see the wind and give me a rough outlook of what the swell potentially is going to do. Now, another website I use is actually a Department of Transport website here in WA. So the West Australian Department of Transport has a marine section for all the boating, recreational craft. They can sort of visit there and see the conditions. Now on there they have several swell buoys, whatever you want to call them, located around Western Australia. Some of them are in Perth, some of them are up north, some of them are down south, near Margaret River, Cape Naturalist, sort of the places that WA is kind of famous for surf-wise. And you can see real-time what the swell is doing. So we don't actually have a buoy here in Perth. They actually have a buoy located just off Rottnest Island, which is about a half an hour ferry trip out to sea. Popular tourist destination, and some amazing surf breaks as well. You've got Strickland Bay, Strickos is amazing, Chickens, Stark Bay, Cathedral Rocks. There's so many amazing breaks over there. So the buoy is actually located over there, but it will give me a real-time reading of what the swell is doing. They're the 2 most common ones. It lets me check the swell, so before I even get in the car, I know that, okay, there's swell down at the beach, there's X amount of swell, and then using the other Seabreeze website, there's the winds are really good, really bad. It tells me whether or not to even bother packing the cameras, or just to chuck my board in the car and go and have a little surf, decent surf. It might not be worth actually getting out in the water and taking photos because it might be pretty average conditions, but they're the ones I use. Now there is a third website that my dad, my guru surfing for, 55, 60-year-old father, dad's been surfing for a long time, that he put me onto, that's actually from the American National Weather Service. Now what this does is give us actually an up to a 9-day lookout on low and high pressure systems around the world, and sort of gives you a forecast of when potential swell could be hitting your section, your section of coast around the world. Now, I just looked at it now, so I'm going to give you guys sort of the screen record live preview. Now, when you learn to read these sorts of charts, they're not very difficult. I can see here that roughly in about 9 days' time, there should be a decent patch of swell hitting the southwest and West Australian coast should be a decent patch. So at least I know looking far ahead, because there's not much on the horizon as far as the local forecast, but using this website, and this works globally for everyone, I can see that in 9 days' time, we should have some surf. So hopefully 9 days' time from watching this video, it'd be worth actually getting out in the water, taking some photos, potentially making an in the water video for you guys if it gets that big. But everything's very loosely based. You learn to read these things, and sometimes the forecast can predict as much as they can predict, and the conditions just don't meet that forecast. As telling the weather's not 100% accurate, it can change. So sometimes the best thing to do is just, unfortunately, you got to drive down to the beach and have a look for yourself. So now we're on to gear, guys, which is, the photography aspect of it. But again, all that weather reading conditions, I know some hardcore landscape photographers do the same thing when planning shoots into any remote areas or anything. They want to know what sort of weather conditions they're going to have. Same for surfers, guys, and surf photography. We want to know what we're going to have. Now, gear-wise, either shooting film or digital or both, like me. So which cameras and which lenses am I going to use? Now, if you are fortunate enough to have enough money to buy yourself an underwater housing, and you just if you shoot film and digital like me, what I can highly recommend to people first, before we start talking about all the other stuff, is to get yourself one of these base housings, like this Aquatech base housing. This, with the simple use of two separate cables. So I have this one cable here, which connects to my Nikon F6, lets me shoot film in the water. I have another Fujifilm cable, which connects to my X-H2 that's filming me now, that lets me shoot digital in the water, and all I have to swap out in between is one cable and one plate kit. It's a great way to save a bit of money, and it lets you shoot both without having to have one dedicated housing for the film camera, one dedicated housing for the digital camera. That's the cheap route. I mean, again, I have no controls. I set the housing I use has no back controls, so I set all my functions, controls, set everything prior, and then go out in the water. If you want to spend more money, you can get a more fancier water housing that's going to give you access to the controls on the back. Obviously, you're probably not going to find one that will give you access to a Nikon F6 controls. But again, you'd buy your digital housing, access to digital camera settings on the back, and then your film camera, there's not much to change anyway. Now, moving on to lenses. Sorry, I'm trying to rush this through because I know this video is going to take a long time. If you're shooting in the water, guys, I honestly feel like as a starting point, there's two lenses that you should go with. A 35mm lens or a 50mm lens, or both. They are a perfect place to start. Now, anyone who's watched any of my Nikonos videos or knows about the Nikonos cameras, you know that they pretty much all come with that 35mm 2.5 lens. This is the 35mm 1.8G lens, Nikkor lens here. Now, there's a reason. 35 is wide enough to capture some environmental shots. If you're not too close, you can get a reasonably expansive shot of a wave breaking on top of you, of a barrel breaking, a surfer coming towards you. But you're not going to get that expansive fisheye look, but it's enough to get you started and get you going and get you comfortable in the water. Then again, 50mm for those who might be a little bit too shy or not as extreme. It's just that little bit normal view, so it's still going to give you a nice normal view, but you can just be that little bit further back in the water and not be right up next to the surfers or right up next to the wave when it's breaking, to get you in a little bit closer. Any longer lenses, like there are a lot of people out there who use 100mm, 90mm, 135mm lenses in their housings and shoot surf. I think they're more for your advanced or much more experienced water photographer. They really know what they're doing, because again, it can be hard to judge where you need to sit in the lineup with longer lenses. And then with your wide lenses, wider than 35, you have to be really close, essentially putting you in the danger zone or impact zone. So if you're just starting out, 35mm or 50mm are my recommendations to get you going in the water. Now on land, most people are going to have a 70 to 200 equivalent. This is a 80 to 200 2.8. One of the old Nikkor ones, screw drive, autofocus, kind of slow, but actually a really sharp lens, really beautiful lens. And I picked this up for 400 Australian dollars. This is dirt cheap. This is the era-ish of the F6, or the F5, F6, this lens, so it works well on my F6. But again, I can adapt this onto any mirrorless camera, which works out a treat for me. So this becomes a 100 to 300 on my Fujifilm cameras with the crop factor. Sometimes if you're shooting from land, we just be roundabout way, but we get back to shooting from land. Sometimes 200 millimeters just isn't enough, guys. You may think that 200 mil is quite good, but essentially you want something within the 200 plus to 400 range. It's just going to get you that much closer, because sometimes, depending on if you're at a local beach break, the waves are going to be breaking fairly close to shore, and a 200 mil on a 70 to 200 might just cut the mustard. But more often than not, you're probably going to be wanting to shoot around the 250 to 300 millimeter range. Now, I also have here a really old and cheap, cost me $100. This is a Nikon 300mm f4 AFD series, one of the earliest D series lenses. So it has the aperture collar on the bottom that you can adjust. It is autofocus, it's slow autofocus, but again, you're not, generally if you're using one of these lenses, the autofocus isn't, surfers generally are not directly traveling towards you, they're more traveling on an angled path across the wave or away from you. So it's not too bad. It's slow autofocus, but this thing works quite well. And I found that 300 millimeter shooting from the shore is actually a really good focal length. And I would highly recommend people getting a prime 300 millimeter if you're serious about surf from the land. My honest recommendation is a 300 mil prime. Get an older one, because again, if I adapt this onto my mirrorless camera, onto my XH2, this becomes a 450 millimeter, so I get even more reach. But I am using manual focus, but you've got focus peaking on mirrorless cameras, so it's so easy to catch focus anyway. But highly recommend a 300mm equivalent for your camera system, and then potentially getting a teleconverter down the track. Now, don't worry too much about fast aperture lenses, because when you're shooting surfing from land, you're generally going to be stopped down, unless you plan on shooting surfers at night. I don't know why, no surfers surf at night anyway. But generally you're going to be stopped down to that f8 sweet spot, because you want to have enough of the focus plane in focus so that you can, you catch the surfers and get them as tack sharp as you can, or the waves, the tube breaking, etc. So that is my recommendation for shooting from the land and from the water. Now, last but not least, guys, one very, very important thing for you brave people getting in the water: don't forget to grease your O-rings. Okay, now people, for the longest time, I thought the grease in the O-rings is what kept the water out, and I'm an idiot, and I remember I should need to go back and change one of my early videos from years ago. Now, the O-ring grease is to maintain the O-rings. Now, when your camera is sealed and you don't have any dirt or hairs or dust around the actual rubber O-ring itself that will go around the outside of the camera, it will be sealed. The grease or silicone grease, whatever, that's going to maintain your O-ring so it doesn't crack. It doesn't get torn or anything like that over time, because if you do start to develop little cracks and nicks in that O-ring and you don't catch it in time, you're going to take that camera in the water and it will flood or it will leak. Now, Aquatech, like I have an Aquatech housing, and I always preach Aquatech housings because I have them, because they're actually really, really good. Aquatech have their own little tubes of grease. They're not cheap, but they're not expensive, and you can get those and they work a treat. Or if you want to be a tight ass like me, or you can't get this and you're on a budget, if you're in Australia and you go to any BCF camping store, you will be able to find this. This is Inox MX6 synthetic grease suitable for rubber. It essentially does the same thing. It's a food grade, marine grade, synthetic silicone grease for rubber. We'll do the same thing. We'll maintain those O-rings. So just a final tip, don't forget to maintain those O-rings, people, because you do not want to lose a camera. It's much cheaper to have a spare set of O-rings and a couple tubes of this than lose a camera, remember. So thanks for sticking through, guys. Sorry it was quite a long video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got some sort of insight and it may help you plan for your next surf photography adventure. Happy shooting, happy surfing. I'll see you guys in the next one. Catch you later.